This episode explains how fascists were redeployed into NATO after the First World War, and how it began the new universal fascism. During the Second World War, the banker Allen Dulles and other Anglo-American synergists, who had sponsored both Mussolini and Hitler, were trying to negotiate a peace with the Nazis. They were in contact with SS General Karl Wolff, the private secretary of Himmler. They would leave Nazis in power, without Hitler. This new Nazi regime would then ally with the British and the United States to conquer the Soviet Union.
U.S. President Franklin Delano Roosevelt wanted to crush the fascist regimes. Roosevelt foresaw a post-war world, in which the colonial empires of all the European powers, starting with the British, would be abolished, and the United States and the Soviet Union would cooperate in a grand program of global economic growth.
After the war, the plot began.
Allen Dulles activated the plan with General SS Karl Wolff, and they plotted the redeployment of defeated fascists into NATO. They did establish NATO as an occupation authority for Europe, and they prepared Europe for war against the Soviet Union.
With this Anglo-American operation, the defeated fascists continued still to live, in a new universal form, and pro-NATO.
In 1953, the banker Allen Dulles became chief of C.I.A. and his group continued in this plan. Among fascist people redeployed, we can find the Black Prince Junio Valerio Borghese,
Cosa Nostra was employed by Anglo-American many times. In 1942, BIAS agent Frank Bruno Gigliotti created an association made up of agents and people of Cosa Nostra. BIAS recruited the boss of Cosa Nostra, Lucky Luciano, to free the port of New York from German agents. During World War II, Lucky Luciano was employed to prepare the disembarkment of the Allied troops in Sicily. Among the troops there was the mobster Vito Genovese. Lucky Luciano prepared a list of Sicilian friends to recommend to Anglo-American troops. Among these there was Michel Sindona. Cosa Nostra was employed in the war against communists and in the Portella della Ginestra massacre. Cosa Nostra became a Gladio instrument.
When the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, NATO, was established in 1949, a secret clause in its treaty specified that each nation that wished to join must first establish a national security authority to fight communism, including through the deployment of clandestine citizen cadres. For this purpose, NATO and the Anglo-American intelligence services set up stay-behind units in all European countries.
Operationally, the stay-behind units were run by the military secret services of each NATO nation, as directed by the CPC/AC.
Until 1950, paramilitary activities were limited to plans and preparations for stay-behind nets, in the event of future war. In 1952 it was set up, Operation Demagnetize.
The CIA and the military secret services were instructed to reduce the magnetic attraction of the large communist parties of Italy and France through all means, including political, paramilitary and psychological operations.
The directive stated, the limitation of the strength of the communists in Italy and France is a top priority objective. This objective has to be reached by the employment of all means. The Italian and French government may know nothing of the plan that demagnetize, for it is clear that the plan can interfere with their respective national sovereignty.
Some light was shed on Pentagon and NATO thinking of this time in a Pentagon Field Manual, found along with the lists of members of the elite propaganda P2. found in Pulisio Gallisville in Italy, in 1981. This manual wrote,
There may be times when host country governments show passivity or indecision in the face of communist subversion, and according to the interpretation of the U.S. Secret Services do not react with sufficient effectiveness. Most often, such situations come about when the revolutionaries temporarily renounce the use of force, and thus hope to gain an advantage. As the leaders of the host country wrongly consider the situation to be secure, U.S. Army intelligence must have the means of launching special operations. Operations which will convince host country governments and public opinion of the reality of the insurgent danger.
The manual was issued in 1970. Coup attempts against the Italian government, under precisely the circumstances it describes, were launched using Gladio personnel that year, and 3 more times through 1974.
The manual also wrote, these special operations must remain strictly secret. The fact that the involvement of forces of the U.S. military goes deeper shall not become known under any circumstances. US official James Jesus Angleton set up the clandestine structure in the Italian military and secret services, which produced the Italian section of Gladio. Angleton was a devout Anglophile and a pro-fascist. His father had extensive contacts with Mussolini's intelligence services. By age 28, he was chief of all secret activity, intelligence as well as counterintelligence, in Italy for the Strategic Services Unit. He was involved in the implantation of an extensive fascist network within Italy's military and intelligence organizations. An apparatus later subsumed into the P2 Freemasonic Lodge, which was reinvigorated around 1970. These Angleton people were to be instrumental in launching the terrorism of the strategy of tension in Italy. From the late 1960s through 1980, and then in cover-ups to conceal its mechanisms. Today, the enormous power of fascism is confirmed by the incredible situation that we are living in Italy. You may consider that this material is not only a historical documentation but also a part of our personal help request. Other videos talk about our personal story. And they explain how we are persecuted for our political views, and for injuries of which we are eyewitnesses. The reshaping of Europe's political landscape through Gladio and related, NATO-erected units is stunning. The apparatus that destabilized Europe over much of the Cold War era was first and foremost a private synergist apparatus. This apparatus was embedded in the NATO and National Secret Service organizations, including official clandestine agencies like Gladio. These parallel networks were populated by veterans of the wartime fascist and Nazi apparatus, and associated with secret societies like P2. Synergists posted agents in top positions in the official structures. They create the dangerously tempting, but false appearance, that the official agencies were directing the terror/destabilization programs. When the P2 membership list was revealed in the early 1980s, it became clear that the secret lodge had penetrated virtually the entire security apparatus and political party structures of Italy, and several other countries of Europe and Ibero-America. The carnage carried out by this parallel apparatus was stunning. Italy is the chief theater of Gladio warfare. There were 14,591 acts of violence with a political motivation. Remember that these acts have left behind 491 dead and 1,181 injured and maimed. This is a civil war, with no parallel in any other European country.
Victims are only an aspect. The problem is that now, in the post-strategy of tension era, this Gladio personnel are destroying democracy. This Gladio's personnel is trying to consolidate a new, worldwide fascism, driven by new waves of terror and attacks to international economic system.